Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 16 of season 6. Sam and I had a recent discussion around how organizations can monitor and protect generative AI usage. As we see more users and organizations using generative AI, it's important to monitor its usage and to ensure corporate sensitive information isn't leaked into those services. Here are a few things we covered. The importance of monitoring generative AI usage, and how can Microsoft tooling help perform this monitoring and protect generative AI data going into generative AI.
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you doing this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm going to apologise now if you can hear anything in the background. I have had to crack my window tonight because it is relatively warm here in the south of the UK.
I can't hear anything at the moment. I'm expecting to probably hear more from my end.
Oh, sorry. I thought for a minute there you couldn't hear me speaking. I get no, there's like this. There's this blackbird that kind of just lives in our back garden / the park behind us, and he. I say it's a he. I have no idea about birds, but it's like always up on the roof, chirping away at night. So it's really close to me. It's quite loud.
so to be fair, probably after editing, no one's going to hear that, but I can hear that. I thought that was me.
Yeah. So, but I'm sorry, but needs must. It's quite warm at the moment. So, but I'm not complaining. That's for sure. Not complaining.
No, definitely not.
Anything new this week in your world, Alan?
There was a few things. There was an announcement, I think, that I seen on LinkedIn today, actually, around Defender for Office and integrating third-party security email gateway information into Defender XDR and effectively Defender for Office, so that you can maybe, again, I'm probably going to butcher this a little bit, but I quickly seen it, but maybe have a unified quarantine, but also get the stats from those services to understand what protections have taken place from them as well into one dashboard.
Yeah. Unified quarantine would be really good because I know a lot of organizations really like the protection that their current like gateway or provider is giving them, but if there's extra capability in like Defender for Office, it's hard to justify like the overhead of running the two solutions just from an experience perspective, right? So that would be really handy, 100%.
Yeah, I think the first two integrations are Know Before, and I can't remember the other one. That's terrible. But yeah, Know Before was one of them. Okay. And there's another one that's the first sort of what they're calling ICE. I think ICE integrations.
Okay.
So yeah, that sounds interesting to keep track of.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, outside of that, I don't think...
Did I also see a 365 local announcement?
Yes, I did see that. Azure Local being able to run 365 there, so having on-prem Exchange, which is in effect the same as Exchange Online.
Yeah, yeah. That I think that was like the top comment, basically, that we've gone full circle. Basically, we've gone from on-prem Exchange back to Exchange Online hosted on-prem. Basically, so
and SharePoint.
I'll get back to I'll have to whip out my advanced SharePoint 2007 development certificate and get rocking. No, that's it'd be interesting to see. Who will adopt that, like licensing costs and things like that. It'd be interesting to see that in action.
Yeah, I wonder if you do pay for anything extra, because in theory, I suppose you're paying for the Azure Local, aren't you? And its management and everything, and the storage, etc., that it holds. So,
all I saw was the announcement on LinkedIn. I didn't go into it in no depth, so I don't know how the workload runs or anything like that, but I'm sure I assume it's just going to be like a resource in Azure Local, isn't it? Would be my
Yeah, exactly. Or it's
guess.
a new location or something that you do in
Yeah.
Exchange. Maybe if you've got an Azure local attached to the tenant, you can go,
Yeah.
you know, mailbox here, and all of a sudden some Exchange servers, start spinning up on that host that you
Yeah.
don't manage, sort of thing. Maybe, who knows?
But yeah, really interesting to see. Um, yeah, because if you can't go to the cloud will come to you, right? So that's that's good to see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how, unless they're trying to get people to move away from Exchange on the hybrid Exchange side of things, where you need that mail relay or mailboxes to be on prem, and you have to do all the management. Maybe it's taking all that management away from you, making it easy, all managed in one place.
Yeah, giving you the quality of life, like automation improvements of Exchange Online, and just being able to host it yourself, right?
Yeah, all the
You know.
patching, it's all up
Yeah,
to
yeah,
date with the stuff that's on, in the cloud and things like that. You don't have to worry about that. You just manage mailboxes and where they are, maybe.
yeah. Because I assume at Microsoft scale they have, like an automated management solution for all that would be my people are manually managing like you would with like your like on-prem Exchange, setup, right? So
Yeah,
so yeah, if it does need to patch and all of those things, all those lifecycle events, I assume are all heavily automated or semi-automated, 365 side. So
hmm.
yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Right, Alan. What's our topic for this week?
So I don't think we've talked about generative AI much recently. We did Security Copilot about 2 or 3 weeks
Was
ago,
that your
but
last episode? Because you seem to be turning into the Gen AI guy.
no,
No? Okay.
it was my last episode. But
It
apart
was your
from
last.
obviously the news, um, but yeah, no. It, we all know it's the hot topic. We're probably all sick of hearing about generative AI, but this is more around monitoring usage and the data, data feeding into generative AI. How can we monitor that side of things, detect, I suppose, leakage of data, and help protect, certain, sensitive data going into the generative AIs. Be it Security Copilot, not Security Copilot, but Microsoft 365 Copilot, or third-party ones, Grok, ChatGPT, etc., DeepSeek. Being able to at least monitor them being used and things like that. So, just kind of how can we? This episode's kind of how can we monitor that stuff? What tooling is there out there that can help? That kind of thing.
Yeah, no, yeah, it sounds great. And yeah, like you say, it is a hot topic at the moment, but there are real implications of organizations using this technology, isn't it? So we do need solutions to monitor its use, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Right. So, should we get started and just, start off with the sort of the basics of, like why is it important? Why do we need to monitor and protect, generative AI usage in a typical organization?
Yeah. So the use of Gen AI in organizations. I think Microsoft's done a study on Microsoft 365 Copilot, being first party, things like that. That it does improve, or what's the word? Users become more efficient in some of their tasks. In most cases, I think that's fair to say around that. So I think it's something that whether every organization's got a policy on yet, or are trying to see how naturally Gen AI sort of helps within the organization, be it let's say the free versions, and as well as paid versions of where it's Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, or other Gen AI services out there. So whilst it's easy to block these services and just not necessarily ignore it, but reduce the risk by preventing it, users will find ways to, or at least attempt to get around it, to access these services to make their lives easier, and potentially that's risky because you don't know what data they're putting into those AI services. And again, depending on sometimes what level of service you're paying for or not paying for, that AI model might be learning from that data. That's fair to say, Sam, isn't it? Because I think the early days of ChatGPT, people were just throwing stuff into it, and all of a sudden, the secrets of the business of some organizations now been consumed by ChatGPT, is now part of the model. So it's quite risky initially, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the fundamentals of it, right? You're potentially uploading sensitive, like corporate PII data into a third-party system. In some respects, it doesn't matter whether it's Gen AI
No.
or not, really. But yeah, you are completely right. Some generative AI providers say things like, "Oh, your chats or your interactions, the files that you upload will not be used for training." Um, Others now, will won't train on your data, but will learn from the data that you upload and apply that to your subsequent prompts that you put in. I know for a fact that Grok does that, right? Because I once asked it to create me a markdown file, and it gives me markdown files all the time now, even in new, contexts and prompts, right? So, that data is going into a third party system, and it's whether that is the right thing to happen or not, and is it controlled?
Yeah, so you've got that one stance of access to those services and determining which services are allowed and things like that. But like I said, there are potential users will try and find ways around it to be able to to use these services. And then the sort of second layer of monitoring is probably what are users inputting into those services. So yes, we allow them to use ChatGPT, maybe paid or free at this point. But what are they actually inputting on on a corporate device? Can we check that they're not putting in create me a letter for X company and put our bank details into it, and this is what they are, kind of thing. Legitimate reasons for them to help create something, but sensitive data being put in, maybe not trained, but it is going through into a third party, like you said, Sam. But be able to track it at that level, so allow access but restrict what can be put into the Gen AI service. So one being monitoring, and then the second part being protecting. One part, like we said, blocking access, but two, going to the level of what type of data potentially you can stop from going into a Gen AI service. So I think that's all key that needs that organizations need to think about. Again, even if it's with services that you're paying for, to access, and maybe the organization saying that, or the third party Gen AI services protecting your data, you may still not want certain things to go into that one, even after that, trusting them, because potential data breaches, things like that with those, because we've seen it with a few, haven't we, where they've been breached or the AI's been compromised, and the data's been available. So it's just something we need to keep up on, monitor, understand if there is an issue with an AI service, what data has been consumed by it from the organization, to then understand the risk of the data leak, or the potential of the data leak. Because again, it might be users are consuming those services, but there's no PII data being used, so there's no in the end, yes, there's a breach there, but there's no risk to your organization. But without having that information, you can't make that decision. You've got to assume the worst, haven't you, at that point?
Yeah, definitely. And just one point to add, which I think is kind of important with the whole generative AI, I call it tidal wave, right? Is that there is a real tangible benefit to implementing generative AI in certain scenarios in certain businesses, right? So you have a performance and operational driver to implement this type of technology. Okay, so if we think about a really basic like insider risk that we might have had before, somebody emailing a document, their personal email, so they can print it on their home printer. Random example, right?
Hmm.
That's effectively no different than that file being uploaded to generative AI, really, in from the exfiltration perspective. But whereas we could say, hey, instead of doing that, we'll uh, we'll provide you a printer to print on, or telling somebody, no, could you just print in the office? You don't need to use your personal equipment. That's a relatively, or that's a relatively easy conversation to have. But when all teams in the organizations are looking for performance improvements, and every business is looking to improve its margins, that's the world that we live in. We've probably always lived in, but it's more prevalent now. You're going to have a different driver from certain parts of the business to get this technology in, to get those efficiency gains. Okay, so once the business has decided that they want to layer in and make the investment in this technology, there will be a higher level of pressure in order to get it in and get it working than those random insider risk processes that we've been trying to clean up for a long time.
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. In that, I mean, I think I brought up some of the efficiencies Microsoft was suggesting, from Copilot helping. But yeah, you're right. The driver for Gen AI may not be from IT or security. It might be from the business to make efficiencies.
Yeah, and
to save money, or to make increase margins, things like that. And that may be we need it now, get on with it kind of thing.
And I've been in real conversations with CISOs where they say, I've been told this is coming and I need to put controls and protections in place. But it's not like should we do it or should we not? Like, the trigger's already been pulled, if that makes sense. The ROI has been calculated and the investment authorized. So it's it's like a tidal wave, and somebody's got to be there to to protect it.
Yeah, and it's that tricky balance of protection, prevention, security sort of policies versus still making a service usable, things like that as well. You've got that balance. We've all everyone in security's got to take risk, being looking at the risks and things like that. So
yeah, and there is obviously a people and process layer to all of this as well. It's not just technology. It does require a level of awareness of end users, but I don't think it's fair to those users to make the assumption that they will never make a mistake, right? And I don't mean that in a critical way. I just mean that in a if somebody's rushing to use your example, to get a sales invoice out, and and they fire sensitive information in it, and they know that's not the right process, but we just ask those people to do the right thing at the right time. I do think you actually have to have technical controls in place to help guide those people to the right process, right? So, and that's no criticism. That's just humans. That's just what we're like,
Yeah, and I think a lot of organisations now are putting in I can't remember what they call it now, but like an AI strategy, policy, things like that, to say what you should and shouldn't do around that. Almost like addition to your user acceptance policy, that kind of thing. What you should and shouldn't be doing with Gen AI, or what the business steer is around it, so that they can, I guess, one, cover themselves from that side, but also help users understand what they should or shouldn't be doing with it.
Yeah, but I bet you the average business doesn't have that today, right? Like,
no, it's difficult to know where to start with it, isn't it? What is the strategy? What AI should we be using, or how much going to cost, etc. It's all right. Organizations, wanting to push a certain one, but it's then working out the controls against them. But technical controls to help prevent stuff where human error can take place.
Yeah, but and my point there is really going to be around like maturity and what businesses
Mm-hmm.
can accept the overheads of these types of teams and these policies to be put in place, right? Because a lot of these businesses are all fall under the same regulation, right? Like protection of PII data, right? In
Mm-hmm.
every modern country in existence, but there are controls in place for that, right? So it doesn't matter if you are a 100-person manufacturing company on a industrial estate or a 5,000-person insurance broker. Well, it's probably not fair because they're probably a regulated industry. That's not a good example, but some other larger organization, right? Another manufacturer that's larger. So the regulation is that this is very similar at the different levels. So it is still a big risk for businesses that don't have like a handle on it, right? It is very important for them. Okay, so we've talked about, I suppose, the challenge and why it's important. But what this is these are new techniques. It's new technology. Are there new methods in and how you monitor and how you protect data being consumed by these services?
Yeah, so this is kind of where I was splitting the sort of couple of scenarios in that conversation just now, in that securing access, preventing access to specific Gen AIs, things like that, is an option. So having a secure web gateway service in play, being able to block all Gen AI services apart from the ones that you allow. Again, that's almost like a fortress wall preventing any access to it, where you may need to for certain things. So that's one way, and there's loads of secure web gateways out there, and other sort of CASB solutions. From the Microsoft perspective, that could be global secure access, internet access, and Defender for Cloud apps and cloud discovery side of things, as the example for that sort of scenario. And then you've got that other one where you're talking about, how do we see the prompts being put in, into Microsoft Copilot, Chat GPT, etc., or the interactions. How do we see some of the interactions? Now, potentially, if you're buying a service from Chat GPT or something like that, you might be able to export logs into a seam, so you can see that information. The difficulty of that in the same fold is that all those chats all that information there is probably very sensitive, and maybe you don't want that to go into a seam as well, because prompts may be sensitive at that point for legitimate reasons. It might be in-house things that they're trying to do. How do I write the exit email for X person, maybe that's being stored into another seam somewhere that you've then got to worry about access to the data, things like that. But some of the other tools, I'm sure there's probably other tools out there, but the view that all the bits that I've seen is been with Purview. Purview being able to see the interactions, the prompts, etc., and then store them within the Purview data, and using the RBAC there to allow access to that data, where all sensitive data or all interactions are stored within Purview. Teams chats, that Purview has access to that. It has access to email, all emails, all files in SharePoint, etc. It's already an area where sensitive data is accessible, and it's being able to bring that into the same place and have RBAC models put on top of it for specifying who can have access. So that's another way of being able to, one, monitor those interactions initially and understanding what protections you may or may not have in place, to then further enhance it to then potentially protect with things like DLP policies, things like that there. to prevent certain bits of data going in there. So allowing access to third-party services, but maybe preventing certain types of data coming in.
Okay, so it does kind of feel like, I don't know, like modern DLP type restrictions, right? It feels like the way that they're approaching it is, do you have access to technically a web application, and what data can you, share with it, right? That's the only. It feels very similar from that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if we dive into, like, at least from the Microsoft side, some of these things, it might sort of show some of the information we can see or how we can protect some of it.
Okay.
So
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to approach it. So where do you want to start, Al?
So I think we'll start with the Defender for Cloud Apps Entra Internet Access side of things, because that's probably the simplest sort of view of it. So with Defender for Cloud Apps, you have cloud discovery. So from a very simplistic, I'm going to say simplistic, but from a license perspective, you may have E5 security at the moment, as an example, or maybe you've got a mixture of Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 and Defender for Cloud Apps as an example. But with that interaction, you're able to then see user activity on their endpoints through MDE, going into Cloud Discovery. And to be fair, if you didn't have MDE and you've got secure web gateways that support it, you can feed that into the logs into Defender for Cloud Apps, and it will generate you the Cloud Discovery reports as well. But with that information, it's able to summarize what SaaS services are being used. And Microsoft's got a list of 100, 150, 200, I can't remember what the total number is, of Gen AI services in there. So you can search through that, the data, and see one, which Gen AI services are being used in the organization or attempted to get to. It's probably a fair comment as well. How much data is going to those AI services, and who is using it. So you've automatically then got that view of, well, there's a lot of data coming from, you, Sam, you're uploading loads of data to it compared to me. So
whoa. Let's go too personal, Al.
Well, I'm sure you've collared me on a few of these. So my turn. But yeah, here's an example of that sort of thing. So, within that, you can use the sanctioned, unsanctioned apps part of it and its integration with Defender to then block that AI service. Or it gives you the scripts for your firewalls or for your secure gateways to block that service if it's not obvious within them. So that's one way of blocking from that side. If you've got Entra Internet Access, so part of the Entra suite, on top of E5, licensing, so it is a something above and beyond kind of thing from a licensing perspective. Within that, it does categories again, and you can prevent users from accessing Gen AI services. Now, within that, with the example of if you had Entra P2, you could have access packages that allow someone access for a day to a Gen AI service that's been agreed. Put them into a group that then allows them to have access to it for a day. There may be some partial just-in-time for a day scenarios there for maybe Gen AI for marketing, maybe as an example, or something like that, where they may want to get some visualizations created by asking a prompt. So that's another way that you can protect or secure access to Gen AI services. And yes, that's probably one way. And again, same part of that as well is that even though Gen AI services may not need MFA or requirements based on the device they're on, someone could access ChatGPT from their home machine, and I suppose they could type in like type in data from your organization to get a prompt out of it. I mean, it'd be some work. I don't see where the efficiency would be in that, because that's a lot of work to write everything out and then respond back and then type it back into your laptop, your work laptop, as an example. But even though they don't have MFA or requirements, you can specify anything that goes through internet access that this this category requires them to be on, requires MFA, requires them to be on a corporate device that's not got any issues with it. So this could help prevent, I suppose, bad actors at this point, accessing services if your machine's been compromised. If you're maybe paying for a service, for ChatGPT or something, you can make that decision to say, actually, no, device has got a high risk on it. You can't access AI services, as an example. I don't know if that would be a scenario or not, but that's the kind of thing where you can prevent it, at least, access from that side. So that's the access side. Now, for monitoring, interactions and things like that, Microsoft's got an extension for Purview for Edge and Chrome. So by putting that on and enabling endpoint DLP as well, that allows for the information to be collected by Purview and then put into the Data Security Posture Management for AI, DPSM AI for AI. So then you'll be able to see in the Activity Explorer interactions with Microsoft Security Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, ChatGPT, Grok, that kind of thing. So collecting that data then gives you that visibility of who is, again, using it, but also what types of prompts they might be doing, or how much data, again, is going that way. Microsoft supports a list of AI services, again, which I think this is quite large. They've got a link somewhere to basically show all the websites that they sort of support. But as part of that, that data can then be consumed into things like communication compliance, DLP policies, or insider risk management, as triggers about user activity or preventing sensitive information being put into a generative AI. So as they try to type it in, Edge/Chrome/ that plugin is able to then prevent that data going in with a prompt, in effect saying, no, not allowed this type of data going into this type of service. So being able to put those controls on the edge where the interactions are, I think, is quite powerful from that side.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry if this is a bit off topic, but how do you sort of handle, like, sort of you've talked about sort of you've talked about sort of managed devices, but is there any specific guidance on like a BYOD scenario where people can get access to corporate data on, like, their personal devices?
So that's going to be not necessarily around, like you said, it's not necessarily slightly off topic, but yeah, you do need to make sure that your unmanaged devices, the data secured on there, so you can't copy it in. So the example might be from an iOS or Android device. If they've got the ChatGPT app, can they copy an email into it and say, hey, can you summarize this? Those controls are done at that. For example, is that protection policies preventing copy and paste into non-enlightened or non-app protection policy enabled services or apps. Prevent that data actually leaving into ChatGPT or any other sort of service that might be there. That would be one control for that. It might be session control if you do allow browser access from unmanaged devices using Defender for Cloud apps. Prevent copy, paste, download, etc. From that side. That's really the only controls you're probably going to have without blocking access to data via conditional access, etc.
Okay, so just I would say like I'll call it like traditional BYOD, data, controls.
Yep.
That is the best practice approach there. Like we've been like advocating, before generative AI existed.
Yeah, yeah, you do need those I'm gonna say standard controls really now. Yeah, for our managed devices, protecting access to data. Managed devices, same thing. Securing access to data based on conditions in conditional access, um, and potential DLP policies. Secure, it's almost the standard stuff of preventing access to services that you don't want users to have access to. The first part I went through, and then you got the more advanced stuff around purview. Where you're able to see the allow access, but I want to monitor it or protect about certain types of data being consumed by the LLM, large language model, of choice at the time there. So being able to have that more flexible, what I was saying before about the whole, prevent access. That means IT, or IT and security are golden. No, we can't have a breach or anything or data leak because no one can get to the data. And then you got the business saying, well, I can't now create me 20% efficiency in the business to make to increase profit margin. So being able to relax control to access, but then monitoring that access and preventing data leakage where it makes sense, kind of thing.
Yeah, because we are inherently wanting to verify and trust these third party services that we're interacting with, but ultimately we're not trying to stop that interaction, are we? We're just trying to control it, right? So we're saying like, our organization, we are just ChatGPT as an example. I used an external one so that it make it a little bit more
Yeah.
complicated. Like it's not first party, is it? So it's not really any different. But my point being is like, right, we're going to use ChatGPT, so everything else is going to be blocked, and whatever goes in and out of ChatGPT, we are going to monitor and we're going to control. As part of our data classification framework.
Yeah,
Including standard controls.
and even if monitoring is the first stage and maybe protection is later down the line, the idea is that, say, ChatGPT got compromised and there's a data breach, etc., you've in theory got some information to understand what type of data your organization or your users have been putting into that service. So then you're able to make that decision on whether you've lost sensitive data or if it's just nothing to warrant. This lower risk, of customer data, PII data, being part of that leak, and your exposure to that part. If that makes sense. So where if you've got no monitoring of it, of the interactions, things like that, you'll just have to assume that you've got sensitive data in there, and that you're going to have to announce it or do whatever you need to do to protect, the brand of the organization, things like that.
Yeah, 100%. And when I've been in situations talking to like say legal counsel as an example, often a question they will ask is I need an exact list of what or has or has not been accessed,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like the file names, like what is it, right? Because then, dependent on what's in that list, is then what maybe then gets shared or not shared with a regulatory body, right? When you're notifying them of a breach.
Yes, exactly. It'll tell you which customers data may have been exposed versus having to tell all of your customers that their data may have been exposed. Reducing that impact. And with the new, and again, I've not tested this out yet, but with the new data security investigation that you can do via the Defender XDR portal / Purview portal, that's another thing where you can say, right, this is where the incident's taken place, etc., or with this service, what data, what's my risk, what PII data has been exposed there potentially. So again, helping, whilst it's only monitoring, it's giving you that context, that information to make a decision about whether the organization exposed in that breach as well.
Yeah, 100%. So we talked. Anything else on sort of MDA and internet access, or do you want to move on to say Purview?
Yeah, we could go on to Purview. I mean, I think we've kind of dived into that part a little bit just as we were sort of talking then. So, but yeah, you've got things like the data security posture management, giving recommendations, insights about AI activity within the organization. So this is the discovery bit. Being able, it also has some ready to use policies for protections. But yeah, it's used for most of it is, well, part of it is definitely used for Microsoft 365 Copilot or Copilot 365. I can't remember which way it's round, which way round that is at the moment. But all the interactions there being first party, understanding oversharing, where sensitive labels been used, etc., things like that. But you've got this other part about non-Microsoft AI. So being able to collect that data, like I said, we're using the Purview extension that you can deploy via Intune or other MDM solutions, etc., or even it's just policy really to say automate deploy this extension. But getting that in place, like I said, allows you to start monitoring the information. Now, I think last week we talked about the new, what's new, and Microsoft has brought in some pay-as-you-go services where you have to pay for consumption of certain data, and in effect non-AI interactions have been included in that for collection for I think it is for communication compliance and insider risk for them to store the data, which I think is because it's above and beyond Microsoft, I suppose the perimeter of Microsoft in it being already data already being there and Purview just accessing it. They're now as stuff comes out of, I guess, GA, generative availability, they're now having to sort of say, well, actually, we do need to store it somewhere. So we do need to charge for it to store it, which I think is fair, because that data could be, if you're a large organization, that data could be, and you're doing a lot of AI prompts, etc. That could be a lot of data that Microsoft got to store somewhere outside of their own service. But yeah, so consuming that in means that you can, like I said, you've got those other tools like communication compliance to understand, not to say bad language to the AI. I don't know if the AI would respond to you anyway. But looking at sensitive data being put into that, whether that's just alerting or preventative. I think there might be some DLP policies. Data lifecycle management is part of it as well. Retention policy for AI interactions. And being able to hold that and only store that data for as long as you need. It's one of the examples there. An interesting one was e-discovery, which I just thought about, Sam, was actually storing that data. Potentially you can do an e-discovery about what someone's been doing or what they've been talking to an AI about, which is a bit of an interesting scenario.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, there's various things that obviously you have to pay for there, but again, bringing that data into one place, and again, Purview is probably the right place for it rather than a SIEM, because you've got those extra controls, because all that sensitive data is in the Purview portal, isn't it? Emails, chats, Microsoft Teams chats, things like that. Could all be, it is all PII data really per se. There is some personal person identified information in those chats, and maybe in the interactions as well. It does, you're able to identify, I guess, a user in what they're typing to an AI. So security teams may not need to see that. They just need to know that there's a potential security risk there. So it's definitely the right place for it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely 100%. And just to go back, I know that these are like add-on fees, but that has been the billing like methodology for I call it Azure Purview governance portal, right? Anything
True.
that's essentially outside of 365, like you say, where you've essentially paid for that data retention anyway. Even services in Azure have been on a consumption basis to store the data, and even actually it was more than that because you had to pay for the processing as well separately
Mm-hmm.
in some respects. So actually being able to collect a lot of this stuff on a pay as you go model, I think is fair, and I think it'll also, because people are being charged for it, they'll actually think about it instead of just ingesting everything and overloading the service.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know, I think this came. I think the pay as you go sort of came out in the this part of the pay as you go. Sam, not going to say the governance part, the catalog side, um, is new. I think from 6th of January this year. I think it's when it sort of started creeping in a little bit. It's only recently I've seen it properly prompting. I think we said last week they brought it all in sort of officially. So, but yeah, so having that data in there is key. And like I said, there is protections there that we can put in to start protecting, sensitive data being not leaked, but put into those AI services. So it's definitely a good place to sort of start. But I think, as I said before, I think just being able to collect the data first is the key part to understand how users may be using it, or like I said, if there is a breach or there is an issue, you can at least identify where the issue is or how exposed an organization is to that breach, etc. And then protections are later, once you can understand what type of interactions you can protect against.
Yeah, and it is probably worth calling out that journey from monitoring to protection and enforcement, right? Because we see that on, like, I call it like traditional DLP, right? A lot of
Mm-hmm.
organizations I've worked with don't have anything today, and the first step is like monitoring, understanding like what's actually happening in the environment, and then using that as a justification to then put controls in place, you know. Um, and it usually gives them a good steer on where they need to focus. So, like you say, it can be, you know, a step change to where you want to be.
Yeah, and same thing, I suppose. If we just briefly talk about, like you said, purview side of things, enabling endpoint DLP gives you all that visibility of what's happening on a user endpoint, and again, like you said, then steers what you should be, what you need to protect against sooner than later, kind of thing. I mean, if we semi ignore purview in this sort of scenario, it's the same thing for uh, Defender for Cloud CSPM, isn't it? Understanding what your environment looks like. You don't know what it looks like until you've got data to validate it. It's collecting the data to help you make um, informed decisions. I think is the wording that we should use, on how you should, next steps are going to be. Where your quick wins are to protect, where you're going to need to work on it because part of the organization is meant to do this type of interaction, the other part isn't. How do I separate that? Who do I need to target, etc.?
Yeah, yeah, definitely, 100%. Any other areas that you want to go over out?
No, I think there's probably a lot more, and it's probably worth, if listeners are interested in it. I think Defender Cloud Apps, Entra, Internet Access is probably very traditional, networking, prevention, secure web gateway kind of scenarios. I think everyone will probably be aware of. You may have other services doing that, but potentially you can do it with Microsoft as well. But I think the purview bit around the interactions, things like that, I think that's quite a unique thing. And again, some of that you can start collecting that data. I think today with your E5 compliance SKU or full E5 sort of scenarios, to start getting that visibility, being able to understand, what's happening. Even if it's just to understand how your users are using generative AI to make that, maybe help make that decision about your policy. It might be as simple as that to help the business work out, how people are using it and how they're making efficiencies as well.
On that note, Alan, is this really paywalled behind E5 security and E5 compliance? If we're like a business premium type organization, what can we do in that scenario? Are we leveraging on traditional like web filtering at that point? Can we go to this type of level?
That's a good question. I am not sure. I can't remember what you get as part of the business premium. Let's have a quick look as you've kindly brought it up.
Sorry, I'm just sorry. I don't mean to throw a spanner in the works. I'm just,
Yeah,
I work with a lot of people that don't have that and can't justify it.
No, so to be fair, even with business premium, you won't be able to do any Defender Cloud App stuff or Entra Internet Access is a separate SKU anyway. You would have to go E5 security on that to be able to get the MDA part of it,
which you now can do, right? So that
Yep.
side's good from that perspective.
Yep. And can you do compliance as well on that? I don't know.
Business, you can't do compliance step up. I think you can only do security.
Yeah. Okay. So you will need to get. Yeah, it's a good point. So, yes, I don't know. It is going to be secure web gateway blocking internet at that point.
Yeah, I think it's just.
I don't think you get anything without
a
compliance license.
Yeah, I feel like in that scenario, you're just going to have to leverage your secure web gateway to do blocking or allow. And then you're just not going to get the context of what people are. You might have logs in terms of how many times they've accessed it, but you're not going to get that real rich information about, what it was going in and out of those services, right?
Yeah.
So, but security add-on can help you with that, like web gateway, session control, MDA angle of it as well, can't it?
Yeah, a little bit around the cloud discovery part of it. Yeah, CASB sort of solution part of it. But maybe that's probably the best interaction with it, to be fair. And Defender for Endpoint be able to block anything you unsanction in there, in effect.
Yeah, and it has even more than that in it as well, doesn't it?
Oh,
right.
Yeah, but there's more. Yeah, more to the E5 thing as well. Yeah, we're just talking about this scenario of or use case of using that that license to help with generative AI side of it.
Cool. Thanks for that, Alan. Sorry for that curveball at the end. That was great. Thank you ever so much. That was really hot topic and really important for people to understand.
Yeah. No, that's all right. Okay, what's next week's episode?
I'm going to cover Azure Bastion, which is a service that lets you connect to a virtual machine using your browser and via the Azure portal. Or SSH actually, or even RDP, the client that's already installed on your local computer. So it's used as a way to privately and securely connect to workloads, virtual machine workloads that are running in Azure. It's fully managed by Microsoft. You just you create it, you start using it, and it's a pretty effective service. I'm going to cover that because I can't believe we haven't actually talked about Bastion before.
I was just about to say, I can't believe we haven't done that yet.
It's almost like just too core. Does that make sense? Like, as in it's hidden in plain sight, basically. Yeah, we've done all these other like security, Azure-based security services, but
Chaos
we haven't.
Studio. Yeah.
Well, we did AVD, didn't we? but we haven't done
Yeah.
Bastion. So we'll talk about Bastion next week.
Yeah, sounds like a good one to do. Okay, if you did enjoy this episode, please consider leaving us a review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. This helps us reach out to more people like yourselves. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact.
Yeah, and if you made it this far, thank you ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yep, thanks all.